Welcome to Northwest Tech Show. I'm Dave Duncan, and this is the show where we talk about technology and about how a better understanding of it can help you achieve better results at home, at work, and in your civic engagement. We're going to kick things off, as we like to do, with a couple of clips from the good folks at twit.tv, Creative Commons. This Week in Enterprise Tech 343, and This Week in Tech 720, talking about WannaCry, the Baltimore cyber attacks, and the NSA.
This is Twit.
Now, you're probably not surprised that ransomware is on the rise. Well, for state and even local governments, it continues to grow as an issue. Now, based on recent security scans done by a public tool, reveals that a ton of public organizations have failed to do more than put a patch over common system vulnerabilities that, if successfully exploited, could bring their operations to a standstill. Now, if you remember, we covered the Robinhood ransomware, which infected the network of the Baltimore City set of computers 2 weeks ago. Even after that big blow that brought the city to a halt, the InfoSec group that was actually supporting that is still having trouble securing their infrastructure and software for even more vulnerabilities. Now, let's put it to some perspective here. Baltimore wasn't the only one to be hit with ransomware over the last one. Listen to this list. Lynn, Massachusetts, Cartersville, Georgia, both were hit with an electronic payment system which actually taken offline by ransomware this past month. Greenville, North Carolina was struck by the same Robinhood ransomware affected by Baltimore in April. But here's another eye-opener. Remember that SMB v1 vulnerability we found a couple of years ago now? Public organizations still haven't actually plugged that hole. In fact, the Shodan search engine and other public sources have revealed that hundreds, if not thousands, of servers on the U.S. public school systems are still vulnerable to it. In fact, down the street from all the hubbub with Baltimore, the Baltimore County's public school system have 8 publicly accessible servers that still were running in configurations that indicated they were vulnerable to the Eternal Blue vulnerability, the Equation Group exploit exposed by shadow brokers back in April 2017. Now, this exploit is also used as part of WannaCry malware. Baltimore isn't the only city here with the problems, though. The Montebello Unified School District in Los Angeles has problems. Fresno Unified School District in Fresno, the Washington School of Information over in Washington State, Cupertino Union School District in San Jose, and the list goes on. It's 2 years since WannaCry. When is it time to actually start vaccinating and stop being vulnerable to the plague of exploits that can be prevented? If you or your organization haven't checked yet, you might want to go on that witch hunt to ensure your systems are secured and safe from the WannaCries of the world.
This is Twit.
Great writing from the New York Times. Credit to Nicole Perlroth and Scott Shane. As you know, Baltimore for 3 weeks now has been shut down by ransomware. It's frozen thousands of computers, shut down email, disrupted real estate sales, water bills, health alerts, and other services. Here's the bulletin they put on the City of Baltimore webpage. The City of Baltimore is currently unable to send or receive email. If you need assistance, call us. The ransom, $100,000. City officials, to their credit, refused to pay it. Mm-hmm. And a side note, I just read an article, I think it was on Motherboard, that a lot of the companies that get hired to remediate ransomware, what do? They pay the fine. Ooh. They add 10, 20% for profit.
Really?
Job done.
Oh.
So do not pay the Bitcoin ransomists, okay? I'm just saying. But here is this is the great writing, again, from the New York Times, from Perlroth and Shane. Here's what frustrated city employees and residents do not know. A key component of the malware that cyber criminals used in the attack was developed at taxpayer expense, a short drive down the Baltimore-Washington Parkway at the National Security Agency. This is...
Woo! Peace dividend!
This is Eternal Blue. You remember the shadow brokers leak of a bunch of NSA exploits some years ago. I mean, NSA never really explained how it happened, although if you piece it together, it sounded like an NSA contractor decided to take those files home with him. So not so he could steal them, but so he could work at home. He was running a Kaspersky antivirus on his machine. One of the things Kaspersky does is quarantine threats. Whether intentionally or not, Kaspersky recognized that the guy had a bunch of really good hacks on his machine, so they quarantined him and sent him back to the home office, which happens to be in Moscow. The Russian secret police apparently have people working at Kaspersky. It's unknown how close Kaspersky is to the Russian secret police, but they certainly have access to those quarantine files, and the rest is history. The thing I said on the radio show today, and I think this, and I wanted regular people here, not geeks, is this is the problem. The NSA, the top spy agency in the United States, the most security focused, these guys really know their stuff, couldn't keep this stuff internal for long. And you want us to put back doors in all the encryption.
Thank you.
Right?
Right.
If you can't keep these secrets, are you going to keep the back door secret?
You can't. Well, you couldn't even
can't.
if you didn't. So
what that means is any weakness you put in any software is eventually going to be used by bad guys against the United States.
And this is, Leo, this is where I really want to give Microsoft credit, because they really took a risk in moving forward, and they came out.
We should say Eternal Blue is an SMB exploit that takes advantage of an old version of SMB, Microsoft's file sharing.
Sure,
technology.
absolutely. But their legal team has come forward, and they've had a lot to say about the NSA stockpiling zero-day weapons, and talking about how we need to have a national ban on them doing that. Because what happens is these 0 days are out there, it prevents people from patching it, and rather than kind of using this for cyber warfare and being able to use it to get their own way, we should have them working proactively with Microsoft, with other architecture to plug these holes and address it, because it's exactly as you said, it's just going to get weaponized against the American people.
From the same article, Eternal Blue, the SMB exploit that allowed these malware programs to be wormable, so that it's one thing if you get one computer in the Baltimore city government with ransomware, but what happens is uses Eternal Blue to worm its way to all the computers.
Yeah.
Eternal Blue was so valuable, former NSA employees said, that the agency never seriously considered alerting Microsoft about the vulnerabilities and held on to it for more than 5 years before the breach forced its hand. The breach was 2 years ago, so for 7 years that SMB1 flaws existed.
Right.
So, but Brianna, let me
please
counter you though. Clearly, national warfare, struggles, espionage is all going to become cyber-based, right?
Absolutely.
That's where we're headed.
Right.
If our NSA our NSA is not allowed to develop tools to do cyber warfare, then aren't we tying both hands behind our back?
I think it's a good argument for that. Have you read Countdown to Zero Day about Stuxnet Source? What
a great book.
It's a fantastic book, and I won't go into all the details, but I will say the technical wizardry that they used to basically shut down the centrifuges in Iran, it was brilliant. It's certainly that kind of cyber warfare is going to...
No lives were lost, but it shut down their nuclear
kind
capability.
of an optimal solution, but there was a lot of collateral damage because this worm was spread all over the world. So, look,
By the way, if you fire up a Windows machine that is not patched for Stuxnet, you will get it.
Yes,
because it's endemic on the net. It's just constantly out there.
Absolutely. So this isn't all or nothing, Leo, right? We live in a dangerous world. We do need to take this seriously. But in this particular case, the NSA was unable to keep this safe. And I would invite you to...
They kept it safe for 5 years until somebody who deserves to get the "There is no patch for human stupidity" T-shirt decided to do work from home.
Fair point.
If you're working at the NSA, you don't take... I'm pretty sure. I mean, I could be wrong. Rules may have changed. I don't know anybody at the NSA that well, but I got to spend a couple, a day with the NSA. They have some pretty... They're uptight
smart.
people.
They're
really uptight. And they have rules in place, and I'm pretty sure...
those rules didn't stop Edward Snowden, and then several years later did not stop...
Well, there is no patch for humans. That could be the short version.
Right.
I mean...
Until the government is not run by humans, I think we got a problem. I feel like we're not going to give up developing these tools.
Right.
But I think there is an analog here, and that is biologic weapons. So there is also a lot of incentive for governments to create biological weapons. But we have I don't know if it's Geneva Convention, but we have an agreement among governments that they won't do it. And the reason is these pathogens that probably do exist in labs, I'm thinking, should they get out, would wipe out the population of the country.
Right.
So there are restrictions on this kind of warfare. Maybe we need. Is it even possible to get people like Iran, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, China, Russia to agree to some sort of cyber moratorium?
I think if you're talking to people at the NSA, if you're talking to InfoSec experts, they are talking about this. The United States cannot go it alone and solve these kinds of problems. If we're talking about truly...
we would be unilaterally disarming if we did.
Exactly. So we've got to do exactly what you're talking about. Form alliances with other nations,
We're
form
so
standards.
good at that right now.
Well, it's not great, but we can change that. We can change that. So, you know, the truth is we just can't isolate ourselves. We need to engage with other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tempting to say, well, screw it,
but this is all.
But
this
we
is
got
all,
to try, right?
Yeah.
This is all one giant mess. You know, for example, Dianne Feinstein hates cryptography fundamentally. I don't know how else
she
to say
doesn't
it.
get it.
I don't know if she. I think she totally gets it, but her priorities in terms of, you know, national security, that's much more important to her than maybe not every bank account in the planet getting hacked.
Right.
I mean, it's you know, you talk to people at different levels of government. I mean, one of the fun things about DEF CON is who you run into drunk at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And people who are at the front lines have a very different perspective from people at home. And if somebody spends their entire day going, yeah, well, we get hit by this, 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 and people are constant. The whole cyber warfare thing, you know, there's little skirmishes going on all the time. There's all sorts of mayhem going on.
I just read an article about there's a little island off of Manhattan that we do practice cyber attacks on the grid. And it was just in the Times today, I think. And every 6 months, they bring down the grid and see how fast we can get it back up again on this island that nobody's allowed to visit. It's a private, you know, military installation.
I just want to bounce off what you were saying with Dianne Feinstein. You know, she voted to reauthorize the Patriot Act. She voted to basically, she's very against cryptography. In my experience, I think it's faulty thinking to think any particular political party is going to come to your rescue on this issue. Yeah. When I talk to people...
I'm not talking about a political party. I'm talking about one of the senators from the state I live in.
But there are
It's
a lot
going to
of
be diametrically opposed to the companies that generate the majority of the revenue.
Absolutely.
In her state.
And I think
a lot of the citizens.
I'm running as a Democrat. I think it's time for us to have a conversation saying we have not been good on this issue. And the axis of conflict here isn't one political party versus another. It's informed versus uninformed.
Yeah, and then we just need to figure out how to separate all the special interests.
And it's not just in the U.S., though, and that's the real problem. Because Eternal Blue was first used by the North Koreans. They used it to bring down the British hospital system, the national health system. That was the first use of it. They brought down German railroads, 200,000 organizations around the world. Russia used it with NotPetya. So North Korea had WannaCry, which used Eternal Blue. NotPetya used Eternal Blue. It was aimed at Ukraine, but it ended up leaking out. FedEx cost them $400 million. Merck cost them $670 million. So these companies could reasonably lobby and say, look, we got to do something. But I think you also have to convince these countries. And I think it's a case of you have to say the damage, the collateral damage to your problem is, how do you convince North Korea? Yeah, here's the island, by the way. Have you ever been to Plum Island, Patrick?
No.
Off Long Island Sound?
No.
Well, you can't go there.
Good.
And it's where DARPA runs war games for a massive cyber attack.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's owned by the Department of Homeland Security. Major attractions are a defunct lighthouse and a center that studies infectious animal diseases. Strangely, though, their power goes out every 6 months. It's an exercise.
I suspect they fire up the generators before they run the war
really shouldn't
games.
kill the power on the bovine.
It's not a place to kill the power.
No. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I think they probably warned them ahead of time. So every 6 months, DARPA ferries over experts on a ferry, on a boat, who work to jumpstart a dead grid while warding off a series of cyber threats. At least we're wargaming this stuff. Yeah. We're preparing.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, Leo, I've had some scary conversations this year with people.
Have you? Kind of secret, deep deep background
Well,
stuff?
I would just say sometimes you try to talk to people in positions of power about this, and you expect there to be a certain amount of technological literacy. And my experience has been it's not quite there.
Here's the other issue. North Korea is like the Battlestar Galactica. Right?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? They've cut themselves off from modern technology.
Yep.
So you can't really say to them, oh, you got to watch out. WannaCry could bite you too. No, it can't.
Oh, so we just do an EMP above the country.
No, don't say that, Patrick. People will think you're serious. Although
they
That
come not
also wouldn't
serious.
affect them.
it wouldn't affect them.
That wouldn't affect
They're
them.
the Battlestar freaking Galactica. They're using phones with wires and dials.
We'll talk about EMPs later.
Will it break those too? Does it break a fine Western Electric phone made out of hard rubber?
That's a really good question.
I bet it doesn't. No neutron bomb will blast that out of the sky. So the Department of Homeland Security last year issued a dire warning that state and local governments are getting hit by a particularly destructive malware that is relying on Eternal Blue. Microsoft, this is the Microsoft Center, the Eternal Blue Tracking Center. Notice they have one of those fine Surface Hub.
Mostly, I just like that at least one person's wearing like a camouflage thing.
You can't see me. I'm invisible right now. You don't know where I am.
Well, it's
This feels kind of staged. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
it looks kind of staged, but it's funny, right? Because there's a blog that I love to read called Granola Shotgun, and what he talks about mostly is how things are evolving in communities and why big box. He walks through the sort of how towns and cities got to where they are with the ex-urban production, and then how big box stores are dying, and this sort of endless series of rings.
I understand.
Yeah, and that's what it's coming to. They can barely run their own infrastructure without having to deal with upgrading.
Welcome to Petaluma, where the housing office is open 4 hours a week.
Oh.
Good luck getting a permit.
Oh my gosh.
And the streets are decaying because nobody has the money to fill the potholes. And this is a typical exurb small town. I mean, I think this is. I can't imagine what the cybersecurity is at City Hall.
But the answer is
it's like
just
North
not.
Korea. They don't have a network.
Hello?
I mean, the answer is obviously that there's not going to be any, Leo. And this is why there's very clearly a federal role to play in securing this. If the NSA is going to stockpile these weapons, we need to have a process to be able to get emergency patches out. And that's why I do think we need to be funding free and open source software for local city governments to use.
Maybe that's one solution, is to stop using proprietary software.
It's a nightmare. It locks all these,
OpenSSH was a mess for, we found out it had been a mess for years.
Fair point. But as I've gotten to know every single, independent government, they get locked into a different contract with another vendor. Then you've got technical debt and you can't swap it over. This is clearly a case for federal leadership. And the last thing I would say is, I forget what year it was exactly. Was it 94 that we closed down the Office of Technology Assessment
that's the
in Washington?
Story.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense.
This was a very well-run agency that was helping members of Congress understand technology. Now they've got nothing. Now they've got Jack Dorsey.
Yep.
In an interview in March, Michael Rogers, the admiral who was in charge of the NSA during the leak, said this. Well, I don't think he said, well, but he's thinking it. If Toyota makes pickup trucks and someone takes a pickup truck and welds an explosive device into the front and crashes it through a perimeter into a crowd of people, is that Toyota's responsibility? The NSA wrote an exploit that was never designed to do what was done. Yeah, no.
Yeah, it was.
It's exactly what it was. Exactly
I kind of think.
Microsoft's response, Tom Burt, Corporate Vice President of Consumer Trust, said you can't compare cyber weapons to pickup trucks.
Or the NSA to Toyota.
Yeah. These exploits are developed and kept secret by governments. This is exactly what you were saying, Brianna. For the express purpose of using them as weapons or espionage tools, they're inherently dangerous. When someone takes that, they're not strapping a bomb to it. It is already a bomb.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is more like if somebody finds a bomb outside, like on the front lawn, that fell off the NSA truck and then welds it onto their pickup truck, then I'm kind of getting the analogy, but it's...
So there is, I didn't know this, but at the end of the article, last year, Microsoft, along with Google and Facebook, joined 50 countries in signing on to a call by French President Emmanuel Macron, the Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace to end malicious cyber activities in peacetime. So 50 countries signed it, but who didn't sign it? China, Iran, Israel, North Korea, Russia, and the United States.
Right.
So the biggest actors,
the ones that are most likely to get into a scrap,
are not participating. And I understand why, because they say, but we don't want our hands tied behind our back. Of course.
It's not how I would go. It makes us more unsafe to not be working with other people.
Yeah.
So,
I think that there is an eternal optimism in these agencies that no, this time we'll keep it to ourselves. This time nobody's going to get it.
It's going to be fine.
This time it's going to be fine. I really think that that's how they think, right?
Yeah.
We've figured it out. We've locked it down. You don't worry. It's going to be all right.
More often it's more like, wait, what happened?
Wait,
what? He did what?
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip, a couple of them from the good folks at twit.tv. That was a little bit from This Week in Enterprise Tech 343 and This Week in Tech 720, talking about WannaCry, the Baltimore cyber attacks, and the role of NSA in providing the tools for a lot of the attacks that are going on now through leaks, through kind of a tortured path of somebody somewhere takes something home, and and after Edward Snowden, I think they'd be a little more sensitive to that stuff. But step one failed. The software left the building, and thereafter, as they suspect it, it was an antivirus on someone's home system. Said, "Oh, this looks like an interesting bunch of malware," and sent it to the Russian headquarters of the antivirus company, and then finding its way into Russian hands. For example, that's one way it could have all happened. But they they can say, well, if people had followed the rules, then there wouldn't have been a problem. But when it's something this dangerous, you really have to consider, is like, well, is it, given the reality that people happen, should we be messing around with this stuff at all? Should we be maybe turning in these 0 days as we discover them to the companies so that they can remove the vulnerabilities from their system? And even then, this stuff stays out there for a while because it's got, like they said, there's even from the Stuxnet attack and the Samba attack from a couple of years ago, they're just hanging out there with thousands of unpatched machines that are still vulnerable. It's gotten to a scale where cities and counties, governments are being taken out by these tools. Baltimore tried to mitigate. They can't even get their email right now. So they're like, okay, well, as a emergency measure, we'll set up a bunch of Google accounts, Gmail accounts, and those got jammed up. It's like Google algorithms detected, hundreds or thousands of accounts being signed up from the same geographic location, and said, oh, that must be some sort of botnet, and deactivated the accounts. So I think they straightened that out. But this stuff is hard. This stuff is hard to get around. They said that they had this exploit for the NSA had this exploit for 5 years before it was leaked. Should there be hoarding like this? I think one of the things that was interesting was I saw someone that, it's like this whole thought of, well, if we patch all the weapons, then there's a cyber war. Well, what are we going to do? We won't have any weapons. And I think the best thing I heard on this was that the NSA should be split up into several units. You have one that's in charge of, building the tools and such to attack systems. And another that is, because these are some of the best computer security people on earth, have those guys seeing how they can lock down the civilian infrastructure as much as possible. And that means reporting as many low-hanging bugs as they can find. And, they're not going to get them all. The attacks you don't need to have, dozens or hundreds of different ways to attack a common off-the-shelf system. One at any time will do it. So, if you maybe hold on to a 0-day for a few months, and then you turn it over to the manufacturer, and then you find the next one, you have that one for a few months, then you turn it over to the manufacturer, then you could, keep some level of ability to attack systems at any given time, because there's always another attack coming down the road. And at the same time, not leave so many holes that your own infrastructure is super vulnerable. Because in a cyber war, the more advanced country is the one that's at a disadvantage usually, because you have more dependence on your technology. And anyone anywhere can learn how to attack stuff, but to be attacked, you have to have a widespread high-tech infrastructure. As they said, North Korea is like, if the old Battlestar Galactica reboot, the whole point, sci-fi movie, the whole point of why the Cylons weren't able to affect them when they took out the rest of the defense systems was that they had the most primitive systems and they weren't hooked up to the system-wide net and such. So when the Cylons attacked with viruses and disabled all the military assets, they weren't able to affect the Galactica because it was disconnected and analog. And North Korea is like that. Its infrastructure is very low tech. They have, of course they have technology, but it's all very centralized in a few locations. It's not the people at large don't have it. So therefore you're not going to be shutting down much with remote attacks. It's all very conventional attacks that you need to do to go after them. And they've been kind of at a standstill on that for many decades. So in that atmosphere, where as the more vulnerable party, because we're so reliant on the technology, we should really be the leaders in securing that stuff as quickly as possible, because we're the ones that are hurt the most when it gets used. I hadn't heard before about this Plum Island. I thought that was interesting. They've got that military island where they're, practicing crashing of the grid every 6 months. And, that's great. That's, that's skill building. That's, in general, even outside the area of cyber attacks, because they say, they tell us cyber attacks can't take out our grid, whatever. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But there are a lot of scenarios. We did have, widespread blackouts, not too long ago. We're having sunspot activity that's on the rise. So, we could get some solar flare that affects a system, and we are very precariously balanced grid. So, an analyst, anyone who really understood how the grid worked would be able to say, oh, well, if I cut this, if I blow up, these 5 towers at the same time, boom, the whole East Coast will be plunged into darkness, because the failover systems are not perfect. They have weak spots, and if you attack their assumptions, then you're gonna have cascading failure of, this system loses this part, so it glabs onto this slightly larger system to try to balance it, but it's too much of a load, so it takes out that larger system, which then tries to reach out to something else to help it, and that collapses that system, and so on until the whole grid shuts down in a region. And those things are out there. So I'm glad there's people that are practicing, like, okay, how do we get grids back online quickly when they go down? Because in a highly interdependent system, that it's not so much a matter of if, but when that will happen. And it's good to know that they're working on knowing how to fix it. It'd be nice to, before too long, start working on decentralizing our power grid. Just like, every Walmart with just wall-to-wall solar panels on the roof or whatever, et cetera, and wind turbines everywhere. And then we won't have a problem of cascading failure, because each grid will be on its own anyway. So a local failure stays a local failure. And should there be a ban on hoarding the 0 days, like bioweapons? Well, I kind of hit on that. I think if they split up the NSA and said some of them could keep them for a little bit and just like work really hard on coming up with new attacks, and then just passing off the old attacks as they find new ones. I think that would be, a pretty good balance, and have another section that was really just only trying to strengthen our infrastructure. Because a lot of times, like we've talked about with, say, Internet of Things devices, right now, there is no one who has all of the awareness of something being wrong and the ability to do anything about it. The home user, as long as his camera is giving him camera functions or his thermostat is regulating the temperature, then he doesn't know anything's wrong, even if there is something that has attacked his computer there and is using it as a launching point to attack other systems in his house or to attack things on the net. The companies, having put this stuff out in the wild, they don't have any liability for what happens with the stuff once they've sold it. And so they don't really have too much incentive to fix it, and they don't have too much ability to fix it. I mean, if they find a problem, they can provide a firmware patch, but unless they don't have any relationship to the consumer where they can let them know, hey, there's a problem, you need to fix this, you need to download the new patch, because there's nothing that the consumer is looking at that can give them messages. And you don't see very many messages on your thermostat. It's just the light comes on or the light goes off. So where does that leave you? Well, I think a national system of intervening in these things, that both has the ability to see that systems are having problems and has the legal ability to do something about it, and has the tools and budgets to do something about it, that kind of combines it all in one place. So I think that would be a great way, especially with the Internet of Things. Maybe there needs to be, more isolation of Internet of Things devices, because they reach out to call home, but they don't need to go call anywhere else. So they shouldn't be able to en masse attack some toy company in Vermont or something. So just at the router level or at the hardware level, just don't let them attack anyone. Don't let them communicate with anyone else. Maybe put in some update mechanisms. And if they did that, I've seen a lot of update mechanisms kind of abused, where they will update, unquote, something to take away features because it fits their new business model, or because they got sued and now someone says they shouldn't have that ability. Well, the customer, they bought something that was supposed to have a certain level of abilities, and it's a fairness issue right off. It's like, if you buy something with these 5 features and then they just start turning features off, that's basically fraud. You're not providing what you've sold. And they'll claim nobody buys anything anymore. They just license it, but that's kind of that doesn't pass the sniff test. It's like, you went to the store, you paid your cash, you got a thing. You bought it. And if they don't like that, someone who paid cash for a box and got a thing has some rights to that thing, will go into another business, because it's just not reasonable to say, I'm going to sell it to you, but I'm still going to own it and control it and do whatever I like to it without any really restriction on it. So and it also, our collective security depends on being able to trust the source of security updates. So if you know that, you've got a box that's got some, like, say you've got a box that downloads videos or something like that, and someone's going to come along and do an update that's going to take away half your video collection, you actively block the update from happening because you've broken faith with the consumer. Well, that system's still going to be out there with a problem. So there should be a difference between feature updates and security updates. So you should be able to turn them on and off selectively. Like, if I'm going to trust you to give me security updates, I need to have some legally backed rights that you're not going to change my features without my permission. I think that's just one of the things they need to do. And they need to have some external thing, whether it's regulation telling the ISPs to do this, or if it's, something like a fragmented NSA doing it. There should be someone out there that is actively just working on toughening up our infrastructure wherever it is, whether it's private or governmental. Just saying, okay, I see a problem here and here, just as a hazard to the internet in general. You need to fix that consumer, and you need to fix that manufacturer, and press it, as only government can when they make laws in our common interest. You can't say, well, I'm just not going to pay my taxes to keep up the roads. It's like, no, you're going to pay your taxes, right? Unless you have a lot of money, and then you can sometimes get out of it. But to the extent the law is written here, you have to comply with that. All right, let's move on to something a little more fun. This is another piece from twit.tv. This is Tech News Weekly 83, Translatotron.
This is Twit.
In more AI doing stuff news, Google has been busy working on its own language translation capabilities. We heard a little bit about this and have for years now at Google I/O. AI has been critical to the mathematical gymnastics for sure as relates to that, but Google just unveiled something called the Translatotron, which is essentially a project that will translate spoken word into another language. So in this case, translating from Spanish to English, but retain the voice of the original speaker in doing so. So basically, I have, if you scroll down to the very bottom of that article, there's a set of links for playback. Not the first set here, but below this, there's another set. And I can kind of walk you through it. So the first link there is the input. This is the Spanish phrase spoken by an original person. Go ahead and play it.
Larry me preguntó cómo me sentía y creo que es cuando empecé a llorar.
Then the second one is the phrase translated by a real person in English. This is a reference.
Larry asked me how I felt, and I think that is when I started to cry.
And the third one is a standard Google translation, something that you would expect to hear through like Assistant.
I wondered how I felt, and I think that's when I started to cry.
Which translated it a little bit differently. Like that was Google's traditional translation algorithm or whatever, from what I understand anyway. So it differs a little bit from the human translation. Number 4 is the assistant voice translation based on the real person's translation.
Larry asked me how I felt, and then I think that's when I started crying.
And that gets you to this last one, which is that translation, but in the voice of the original speaker.
Larry asked you how I felt, and I think it's when I started to cry.
Although he sounds a little drugged up, but still.
Play the first and the last back to back.
Yeah, do the first and the last back to back.
Larry me preguntó cómo me sentía y creo que es cuando empecé a llorar.
Larry asked you how I felt, and I think it's when I started to cry.
It's not perfect.
He's had too much AI whiskey, I think.
Yeah, I think that's when I started to cry. It's not perfect, but it's just something I'd never thought of before, like a translation that would do it in the voice of the original person. It's just so cool what AI is doing in this stuff. What do you think, Doctor?
This is scary. I don't know about cool. This is not cool. This is not cool. Look, first of all, anything that translates and works is amazing. I'm an international traveler, man of mystery, and I only speak 1 3/3 of languages. I pick it up. If I'm there for 3 weeks, I get what's going on. But otherwise, I use translators. I have somebody there for me. The fact that this thing is emulating my voice, drugged up or not, is creepy. Especially if you live in the world where people just take audio clips and put in words that you never said and put stuff in there, and now I'm just sending my voice into Google and Google's replicating my voice back in another language.
Yeah,
that's scary.
It's the future.
That is amazing technology, and if it works a little bit better, I will definitely be traveling more often, speaking into my phone like a psychopath when I'm trying to talk to people. Oh, I wonder if it translates like if you're yelling at somebody, like if you know what I mean. Like if your voice is all high pitched and you're angry, does it translate back in the tone of your voice? Oh, that'd be amazing.
Oh, I would imagine so. I would hope so.
Oh, I see so many Spanish mothers yelling at kids. I'd be out there just translating it back so I can hear what's going on. It'd be amazing. I need that. Come on, Google.
This is the future, and I'm here for it. I love this idea. Because I have been using Duolingo to try to learn Spanish for, I don't know, since Duolingo began, and I just can't. Like I was bad at languages in high school and in college, and I don't think that I'll ever be able to learn languages. And so that makes me reticent to travel because I'm, afraid to not speak the language. So if I could just put in my my AirPods, and they have their AirPods, and we just talk to each other, and it comes out in their voice. Like, I love it. I think this is great because, I mean, some people are bad at learning languages, but that shouldn't keep us from communicating with whoever.
That would be cool.
You probably need some Google Buds, though, not AirPods.
Probably.
Just saying, yeah.
I probably need some Google Buds, or just like a chip built into my brain.
That's the future.
Hey.
That's your kids will have to deal with that reality.
Kids, no video game system. Mom's going in for surgery for 3 days. I'm having a chip installed in my brain. Don't worry about it. I'll be fine. Robo Mom shows back up on Monday.
Family priorities.
There you go.
Yeah, and I would appreciate if the translation really took into effect the fact that everyone should sound drunk when they are when you're speaking to them. That would make me happy.
Yep, everyone should sound like Owen after he's been in Napa.
2 days.
That they couldn't handle it. It'd be rough sledding with that going on.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from twit.tv. That was Tech News Weekly 83 Translatotron. So this is kind of the logical and useful, in a common way, extension of things we've seen, like the deep fakes, where they were able to basically do motion tracking of an original and using a computer model of a target appearance, and then being able to map the target appearance onto the actions and voice of the original speaker. So make anyone sound like Barack Obama or something. So taking that same thing and doing something useful with it. Okay, let's take the voice to text stuff, so we know what you're saying. We're translating it into another language. We're also keeping track of where you were pitching up and down in the original. We're having a library of your voice and all those the fragments of sound, and reconstructing in the translation in your voice using this library of sound parts and electronically smoothing it, and then adding back in tonal ups and downs on these new words that match the ones that you did in your original speech. So now you have some of the translation in your voice. Now, in some ways, I think doing it that faithfully would actually create some problems, because now you're listening to the same voice in two different languages, and it could make it a little harder to lock in on the version that was actually speaking to you in your language. But you could, if this were something that wasn't in person but was some sort of electronically mediated thing, like say you're talking on Skype, well, that could be perfect. You're just talking to them in your language and they're hearing it in their language, and maybe even remapping your face so that the motion of your mouth matches the words that are being said in another language, and then they're the same coming back. You could have someone have a conversation with someone in another language and not even be aware that the other person was speaking a different language, because you're speaking your native tongue and you're hearing your native tongue, and maybe just some option at the beginning, or even like it happens in text where they auto detect what language are you using. They just figure it out. They try all the language things, like, oh, you're saying gibberish in English, but in Spanish you're making sense, so we automatically detect you're speaking Spanish. Especially with the most popular languages, it would be pretty, I don't know, maybe the word isn't easy, but I could certainly see it being doable that way. It was an interesting thought about empowering people to travel. I don't know if I see that. I can see it being good in an emergency, but as I said, if you're there in person, it seems like it'd actually be more confusing than if it's spoken electronic voice. Kind of a standard synthetic voice with no intonations. I suppose you could do something like it's your voice, except it's pitched up an octave. And so then that would be a little easier to tell the difference between the voice that's speaking in a different language and the voice that's speaking in a language you understand, and it's the same voice. But that's still, boy, that seems like that would be odd. I would like to see that in practice. we've heard these dry samples like, oh, here's the original language, and here's it is translated into another language, and we haven't actually seen a product doing it in practice. And I think that's where it would run into some problems, but not insurmountable. I mean, they did the hard part. This is actually, I don't want to say an amazing breakthrough, because it's a pretty straightforward breakthrough of what they were able to do before, but is a rather startling application that, to see that's like, oh yeah, this is the implications of what we've done already applied to something new. And I think we'll continue to see these broken down into different pieces. Like, they'll have a filter that, takes you walking and turns it into you tap dancing down the street or something. It's the same kind of action. It's like, make you dance like Fred Astaire or something. Turn you into a cartoon, make you flying, whatever. Mapping, once you have that fundamental technology of taking things on one end, breaking them down into a symbolic stream, and then building things up again from a symbolic stream into something that looks authentic. The applications are pretty much endless. Anything you want to put on either end, you could do. You could map your movements to that of a cat. You could literally, here's an application. You figure out what sounds your cat makes when he's hungry, and what body language, etc. And you could have a cat translator program that just, says, I'm hungry, whenever the cat says that, which is, pretty much the only thing they'd say. But, be able to do things like detecting their mood, detect when they're, back off, they give physical and auditory signals that sometimes humans miss that say that, you're annoying me to the point where I'm about to attack you. And you could have software that says, back off, buddy. I'm gonna cut you up. You could do that sort of thing. It'd be pretty startling. Another pretty startling application, but it's the same technology, just applied slightly differently. Lots of things could be done this way. The vibrations, going on in a building. You could have the mood of the building. The building could talk to you, saying, "Oh, I'm feeling a little backed up or something." It's like, "Oh, you're about to having a plumbing problem because of the rainfall or whatever." Just taking all these inputs, knocking them down to symbols, running them through statistical engines, and reconstructing a signal on the other end. It's a very widespread technology. It's a new thing. And I don't think we intuitively have a real good handle on it yet. But once you start to understand it, these are just a couple of many, many things that could be put out there. And it kind of starts to raise the question of trust. If you cannot count on something to be authentic because it looks authentic, if you can't tell by looking at it. I think in a previous show we were talking about, there may have to be some legal or at least norms built around this where, if something is producing a synthetic result that looks real as opposed to something that is real, there should be some requirement that, there's a disclaimer. It's like, this is converted by computer for your convenience or something like that. So you realize this isn't 100% authentic as it was produced. Let's see, we got time for one more quick little piece here. Let's go to influencers and bad contracts.
This is Twit.
So your story revolves around 21-year-old Turner Tenney. He's a Fortnite streamer who's bringing a lawsuit that might change the way the industry operates. Who is Tenney suing and why?
Yeah, so Tenney, who goes by Tfue on the internet, is essentially the best Fortnite player in the world right now. He's really top of his game, really made a name for himself over the past year. He's blowing up. And he's part of this gaming collective called FaZe Clan. And they're kind of this like loose esports team. They have also like YouTubers, other types of streamers affiliated. But yeah, so he joined this gaming crew about a little over a year ago in April. He signed the contract when he was just 20, and it was before he really blew up. And now, he's become sort of like best in class, and he's still subject to this really kind of predatory contract that, you know, can take up to 80% of his, you know, brand deal revenue in certain cases. So he's trying to essentially get out of it.
So you've written before, we've talked to you before about, you know, influencers that are just basically teenagers doing their own thing, having a popular Instagram, and then people will come and say, yeah, I want, you know, to sponsor you. And that's some of the same stuff going on there where they're being taken advantage of. Is this pretty similar to that, or is there something different going on here?
I mean, so first of all, I would say, like, I mean, 90% of brands are not necessarily exploiting influencers. It's not to their benefit either to exploit influencers. You know, influencers get exploited via brand deals through lots of different means. Like a lot of times it's somebody impersonating a brand that might be kind of scamming the influencer, trying to get access to their, you know, login credentials to steal their Instagram account. Or it's, yeah, like maybe they're not getting the best deal because it's the influencer themselves negotiating, you know, because they might not have management, they might not be big enough. This is something totally different. I mean, this is like really, I mean, this is Tifu's not just an influencer, he's a gamer, and he's a top gamer. And I think that, like, you know, with that whole, that's a whole sort of like adjacent industry that comes with a lot of other stuff, like prize money, for instance. You know, like the Fortnite World Cup is, I think, like the prize is like 13 million or something. So, you know, there's just a lot of other stuff that goes along with being a successful gamer. It's not just like YouTube videos.
13. Sorry, I'm a little floored at 13 million. I'm like, wow, I chose the wrong job.
I mean, there's a lot of money and no real oversight. I mean, esports is emerging, and I think, like with this lawsuit too, people are trying to figure out exactly how to classify esports players. You know, some are kind of repped by old, like, music exec type people. Some are repped by actual, you know, former athlete managers. It's all over the place. So I think, like, what, you know, Tifu's trying to do with this lawsuit is kind of like set a precedent and try to put some structure and stuff around that.
So in the lawsuit that Tifu or Turner, depending on if you know him personally, is waging here, like, are the numbers that he's got in his lawsuit differing from the numbers that FaZe issued? Because they issued a statement, I think, on Twitter, if I read correctly, and they broke out some numbers. Like, how do they compare? Were they saying, hey, this is actually very fair, or what?
Yeah, they've issued like 100 statements on Twitter, many of them contradicting each other.
Okay.
Like FaZe Bank, the founder, was like out fighting with Tifu's brother last night. Actually, The Blast, which is an amazing gossip site that constantly breaks YouTuber news, actually got a hold of the contract, which they posted this morning, and it actually does back up a lot of Tifu's claims. So, you know, I saw other people saying, well, this is just one version of the contract. We don't know that this was the final, or, you know, but even if he just signed this version as an initial version, it's still a very predatory contract. So, you know, I think, like, the reason this all blew up is that they've been trying to kind of like negotiate this in private for 6 months, and it's really gone nowhere. And, you know, Tifu wants out, and he also just thinks that people, you know, he's being taken advantage of. Like, he shouldn't, you know, he shouldn't be subject to this, like, exploitative contract that he signed when he was 20, when he didn't understand the stakes.
Absolutely.
So do you think they should be represented by the same people? Athletes are represented by, or I mean, should there be like a Screen Actors Guild of YouTube, or, like you said, music producers? I mean, what's the right way to go here?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that Turner's claiming in his lawsuit is basically saying that FaZe Clan is violating the talent, I think it's called the Talent Agency Act, but basically California law that stipulates like how it's regulation around how talent agencies can work. And so his argument is that, like, FaZe Clan is essentially acting as a talent agency for all intents and purposes, but not subject to the same regulation, because the talent that they're working with is, for the most part, esports players. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's like one of those things that remains to be seen, how all of these different people are, you know, classified. I think there's also just so much misunderstanding. Like, people don't understand the difference between a top Fortnite esports superstar and like a 15-year-old vlogger. Like, you'll see them equated in the same article. And so I think it's kind of like, you know, people need to understand all the different nuances and all the different sort of classifications there are, you know, it's not just, oh, everyone creating content for the internet now is under this union or something. Every sort of role is very different and comes with different, deal structures and stuff like that. So
Content Creators Guild or something along those lines, maybe. Are players pretty united or universally wanting regulation? Are there any reasons why they might not want this to be regulated?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually most people are hesitant for any regulators to step in, mostly because they have no clue about the industry, like less than, it's the same with a lot of like tech regulation, it's just these sort of older lawmakers that, representatives that don't actually understand anything about how the industry works. And so regulating it is a challenge, and you can end up with very problematic legislation that ends up hurting these creators. So, I think people are split. I think that what we'll see, before we see any kind of like blanket regulation, I think what we'll see is lawsuits like this one that set certain precedents, that then people have to sort of like abide by, and the rules will sort of form organically, which is, by the way, what happened with traditional Hollywood too, and child actors and things like that. It was all sort of set through, it sort of progressively grew and grew and grew until finally there was regulation around it. But there was lots of lawsuits and messy stuff first.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv, Tech News Weekly 84, talking about influencers and bad contracts. And this is another example of everything old is new again. We've already established in places like California, they were talking about the talent agency law that is, essentially being violated by these new things because, it's all new and involves computers, and so it doesn't count. Well, people are still people. It still needs to count. And hopefully we'll get there. But, yeah, we don't, I guess in every new industry where it's taking a copy of the old thing and putting it someplace new, there's an opportunity for people to break through that otherwise wouldn't have. And there's an opportunity for people to exploit in a way that's illegal in existing industries. So just look to the past and watch for it to be all settled all over again, probably pretty much along the same lines, with both a higher competition in the future to be one of those rare influencers who gets the big contract, and more restrictions on the talent agencies that handle them to not be doing things like taking 80% of the profits of an individual performer. And with that, you've done it again. You spent an hour talking about technology and how a better understanding of it can help you achieve better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. I hope you'll join us to continue this conversation next week and every week, noon to 1 o'clock on Wednesdays for Northwest Tech Show.